Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome Dr. Tomicah Tillemann, Senior Advisor for Civil Society and Emerging Democracies, to Secretary of State John Kerry. Before Director Anna Maria Bíró introduces the Honorable Speaker, let me say a few words about Tom Lantos, Tomicah's grandfather, and indeed the Tom Lantos Institute. Tomicah's grandfather, Congressman Tom Lantos, was a remarkable Hungarian-American human rights defender who was born in Budapest and the only Holocaust survivor ever elected to the United States Congress. At the age of 16, he joined the anti-Nazi resistance movement. In his floor speeches as a congressman, he sometimes referred to himself as one of the few living members of Congress who had fought against fascism. In 1981, Lantos sponsored a bill making Wallenberg an honorary citizen of the United States and became a member of the International Raoul Wallenberg Foundation. He was the co-founder of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus in 1983 and rose to become the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. In speaking before the House of Representatives after his death, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi stated that Lantos devoted his public life to shining a bright light on the dark corners of oppression. He used his powerful voice to steer the consciousness of world leaders and the public alike. To honor and remember his legacy in his fight against oppression and for the values of democracy, the Congressional Human Rights Caucus was renamed the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission in 2008. Its mission is partly to promote, defend, and advocate internationally recognized human rights. 3 years later, in 2011, the Tom Lantos Institute was founded in his native Hungary for the exact same reason, to promote tolerance and support minority issues in Central and Eastern Europe and in the world. It is my pleasure to see this event being realized, especially that it is organized by such an establishment having the same profile as our institution. Tom Lantos Institute is primarily a research institute and think tank organization, but carries out empowerment and action-like projects as well, with a particular focus on Central Eastern Europe and the Western Balkans. Besides, it implements actual projects in a wider geographical area as needs arise in order to advance the democratization process and to strengthen the enjoyment of basic human rights and fundamental freedoms. We are delighted to welcome Tomicah Tillemann to deliver this first lecture of the Tom Lantos Institute's Human Rights Public Lecture Series. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, welcome. What can I say after an introduction like this? Thank you very much, Dr. Ostoványi. On behalf of the Tom Lantos Institute, I welcome warmly everyone to the first of a series of public lectures on human rights. Tomicah, is wonderful to have you here, and we are particularly grateful that you accepted this invitation on such a short notice. Before introducing Dr. Tillemann, I would like to say a few words about the renewed Tom Lantos Institute. The Tom Lantos Institute is a think tank that focuses on 3 major issue areas. These include Jewish life and anti-Semitism, Roma rights and citizenship, and human rights and minority rights in general. The organization, as you probably know, was founded in May 2011 to continue the legacy of Tom Lantos, who, as Dr. Ostoványi pointed out, was the only Holocaust survivor ever elected to the United States Congress. Now, 2 years after its birth, we plan for the TLI to grow into an organization with a clear, credible, and influential voice on contemporary challenges concerning the understanding and implementation of human rights standards in Hungary, in Central and Eastern Europe, and beyond. Through its work, the TLI prioritizes human rights and citizenship education in a region where the exclusionary forms of identity politics have generated bloody conflicts and genocide, even in recent times. The TLI recognizes that human rights need to become part of public consciousness and popular culture in order to tackle the root causes of ethno-cultural hatred and discrimination. The TLI also prioritizes the engagement of civil society in its work and the strengthening of democratic values. We see this public lecture series as a first step in the development of our human rights and citizenship education program, which aims to demonstrate how human rights values, principles, norms, and standards are relevant and applicable to contemporary and practical challenges, particularly in the region. Through the lecture series, we aim to highlight the problem-solving capacity of human rights to individual, group, and societal problems. The TLI is very grateful to Tomicah to deliver the first lecture in our public lecture series, which is called From the Courtroom to the Street, Creating a Popular Culture of Human Rights. We would like to thank Sejal Parmar, assistant, you are smiling at me, Sejal, with great support, thank you. Sejal was instrumental in conceptualizing this public lecture series and in administering it. Thank you, Sejal. And after this, I would like to introduce Dr. Tillemann, who is, no one is better placed to deliver this lecture, since Dr. Tillemann has this long title as Senior Advisor for Civil Society and Emerging Democracies to United States Secretary of State John Kerry, a position he held under Hillary Clinton as well, but also, as Dr. Ostovanyi pointed out, Tom Lantos' grandson, who visited today the school Tom Lantos used to attend. So you are very welcome, Tomicah, and finally, the floor is yours.
Well, let me thank Anna Maria for that very kind introduction, and also Dr. Ostovanyi. I have to say, by way of introduction, being here at Corvinus University, that whenever we meet truly impressive Hungarians in Washington who've gone to school in Hungary, there's about an 8 out of 10 probability that they have attended Corvinus or the Kuzgaz. And so we are very well acquainted with the products of your work here, and we know them to be outstanding. Similarly, let me thank Anna Maria for your work not only to bring this event together, but for your leadership of the Lantos Institute, both professionally, but more importantly on behalf of the Lantos family. We are very grateful for the energy and enthusiasm and independence that you have brought to this position, and we are very eager to see the Institute emerge as a platform for civic engagement in Hungary that can bring individuals together across ideological and ethnic divides to address some of the critical challenges that you spoke about. And we hope that this can be the first of many similar engagements going forward that will contribute to the ability of the country to make progress on these issues. I'd also like to briefly acknowledge the many distinguished guests who are with us today, and in the interest of not exceeding the time allotted for this event, I will not name all of you in person, but certainly Political Director Starai and others who are with us, we're delighted to see you and thank you for being here. If you will allow me a moment of personal privilege, since this is an event of the Tom Lantos Institute, I'd like to begin by saying a few words about my late grandfather, Tom Lantos. He was a very proud American, and as he often liked to remind people, he was an American by choice, and I will say I never met someone who loved the United States more, but I also never met someone who loved Hungary more. And his affection for both countries was intense, it was unyielding, and it was lifelong. He imparted that same love of this nation's culture, its music, its history, and its language to all of his 17 grandchildren, and I, of course, include myself among that crew. And the thing I admired most about my grandfather's patriotism is that his love of country was not passive. It constantly compelled him to seek after a society that would be a bastion of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. That was true when he first brought me to Hungary in 1984 as a very young man, and it was true on every subsequent visit up until our last visit together, which was his last visit to Hungary in the summer of 2007, a few months before he died. And it's in that spirit that I wish to speak to you today, a spirit of active patriotism, a spirit that seeks to build a democracy here and in all of our nations, no matter where we come from, that can exemplify the values that we'll be speaking about today. And I'd like to begin in an unlikely place, which is the flooding outside the door of this university. The events that we have witnessed over the last few weeks, the floods that have struck Hungary and many other parts of Central Europe, are devastating in their power, and far too many thousands will be affected. But at least here in Budapest, there is no question that the damage could have been much, much worse. Part of the credit for that goes to the men and women who have been working tirelessly, without rest for days, to keep the river from breaching its banks, and we all owe them a great debt of gratitude. But part of the credit also goes to a generation of Hungarians more than a century ago who were wise enough to build structures that would contain a threat that they knew would inevitably face the people of their nation. In many cases, those that built the embankments that have prevented damage knew that they would never live to see the benefits of their work. But they recognized a potential danger to the future of the society that they hoped to create. And they responded by investing energy, capital, and commitment to create structures that would protect their people from that threat. They built a system of safeguards that would endure to this day. And again, we can be very grateful for that fact. It is thanks to them that I will sleep tonight in a hotel steps from the Danube without fear that that structure will wash away in the morning. And I raise this point because the same principles apply to safeguarding democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in all of our countries. Great leaders in democracy understand that dangers will inevitably confront their countries. This has certainly been true in the United States, and we have faced over the course of our history challenges of discrimination, of corruption, efforts by those in power to avoid responsibility, and many other issues which threaten to undermine the stability and the security of our democracy. And these dangers, frankly, are not creatures of ideology. Just as the floodwaters outside our doors don't consider the party affiliations of the homes of those and businesses that they inundate, the threats that I speak of are not liberal or conservative. They will destroy the lives and the livelihoods of those on any part of the political spectrum. Following a transition to democracy, a nation faces a choice about whether to build the institutions, the safeguards, and the structures, the architecture, in fact, that will protect people from the dangers that they know will face democracy in the future. And every subsequent generation in every democracy faces a choice about whether to maintain or strengthen that bulwark against forces of devastation, or whether to let it fall into disarray. Compared to the very tangible dangers posed by the floodwaters outside our doors, the threats that I'm speaking of may seem a bit theoretical. And I want to tell you in the strongest possible terms that I can, they are not. And you need look no further for an example of this than my grandfather. As a young man growing up in Hungary in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, my grandparents survived such a disaster as the one I'm referring to. But many other members of their family did not. They watched as a country they loved under the government of Miklos Horthy introduced the first anti-Semitic legislation in Europe. And years later, under the government of Ferenc Szálasi, many of those same family members were marched onto the flood walls that bound the Danube River, embankments that were built to protect the citizens of the city from danger. And they were shot in cold blood, often by their Hungarian neighbors, into the icy waters of the Duna. These dangers are very real, and while they take many different forms, the devastation that flows from hatred, intolerance, authoritarianism, and bigotry are every bit as concrete as the forces we confront in nature, and often they are just as difficult to control. It is with that background that I would like to speak today about some of the structures that we have learned from experience help democracies prevent the threats that emerge as a byproduct of our very system of governance. Again, the challenges that we face are not unique to any country, and these problems are not unique to any individual society. They are inherent in the structure of popular governance. And yet, we in all of our societies have the opportunity to erect institutions that will prevent them from posing a serious danger to the future of our states. The first principle that I would like to discuss is the decentralization of power. Democracy is virtually always a response to the excessive centralization of power. That was certainly the case in Hungary. And in 1989, citizens of this nation, frustrated with what they rightly believed to be an unaccountable government in which power was concentrated in the hands of a few, brought about an extraordinary and bloodless revolution that established the principle of popular governance and the principle of accountability. Along with that, they created a system of checks and balances and opened the door to political pluralism. When I was conducting the research for my doctoral dissertation on the transition that occurred in Hungary in 1989, it was fascinating to read the minutes of the Central Committee when they came to the realization that the party might well lose its leading role in Hungarian society at the time, and that there would be a pluralistic system in this state going forward. And that moment of transition, which occurred as the result of efforts by many heroic individuals in government, but even more importantly, outside of government, led to the foundations of modern Hungarian democracy that we witness today. As part of that transition, Hungary, like all other democracies, erected a system of checks and balances. And there was a realization that political power cannot be held unchecked by one party, one individual, or any one entity without oversight of others. And there was also a recognition that in the course of democratic processes, as elections are won and lost, there must be a place for the losers in that process. They must be free to pursue their livelihoods, they must be free to contribute to public debate, and they must be able to find a role for themselves, if not in government, then in civil society, where they can provide, ideally, constructive criticism and share their views on the development of the nation. This brings us to another essential element of decentralization, which is the formation of civil society. And we speak frequently about this term. I'd like to unpack it for a moment and describe what we mean when we say civil society. In every nation that is a democracy, we find the country supported by three branches that work together like three legs of a stool. You have government, where political activity takes place. You have the private sector, where we work together for financial gain. And then finally, you have civil society, where we come together as individuals, in civic organizations, in religious congregations, as journalists and academics, and work through peaceful means to make society stronger. No democracy can succeed without a vibrant, independent civil society. And in Hungary, in addition to a vibrant civil society, I would add that there is a critical need for a depoliticized civil society, a civil society that is not aligned with one party or another, but can speak to core principles of democracy independently and with credibility on key issues. It is also essential in the course of building a new democracy, and this would be the second principle I raise, to ensure the protection and the inclusion of minorities. All citizens need to have a voice in the political process. They need to have confidence that they will be treated as full members of their nation, regardless of their background, their religious identity, or their ethnic origins. And they need to have confidence that their concerns will be incorporated into the processes of governance, regardless of whether or not they are supporters or opponents of those in power. They, meaning religious and ethnic minorities, are not fringe groups, but they are fundamental components of who and what a country is. And without their active engagement in society, no democracy can succeed. The third point that I would raise is the need for integration into a broader community. Every country has a lively debate around the issues of sovereignty versus integration. And in this regard, the United States is no exception. Our country is very proud of its identity, and it jealously guards its sovereignty. But we also recognize the need for incorporation into broader communities. Hungary certainly falls into this category as well. And here I am reminded of the words of the great Hungarian poet Sándor Petőfi, who said, "Ha a föld Isten kalapja, hazánk a bokréta rajta." For the English speakers in the crowd, if the world is God's hat, then our homeland is the bouquet upon it. And let me say that I would be the first to admit I know what Petőfi is talking about. And for anyone who has ever spent a summer's evening on Margit Sziget listening to the Csárdas, I challenge them to dispute his conclusions. I think he's onto something here. But at the same time, it is critical to recognize that each of our nations, while unique and exceptional, also have a place in a broader community of nations. And Hungary is very fortunate to be part of some of the world's most exclusive communities, a European community, a Euro-Atlantic community, and a community of democracies. It is critical to value that membership and recognize that fellow members within those communities are eager to see our mutual success, because ultimately, as democracies, we are co-defined. And when we seek to point out challenges or concerns, it is purely because we feel that all of our nations will do best as we work to hold each other to the highest standards possible and ensure that we move forward together. Again, Hungary knows the importance of the principles that I'm speaking of, because twice in the country's history in the last century, many of the nation's best and brightest were forced to flee when the nation fell short of those principles. First in the 1930s, when many of the nation's leading minds, intellectual giants like Edward Teller, felt that they had no choice but to go and make their lives elsewhere. And then again in 1956. How would the world be different today if those talented individuals had stayed and built their lives in Budapest? How many monuments would stand in this city to the works and innovations of those lost generations? The price of failure in upholding these safeguards and in erecting structures that protect democracy is paid over the course of centuries of lost opportunity, and it can be far greater than the cost of a flood or a mudslide. This morning, as Anna Maria said, I had the privilege of visiting my grandfather's gymnasium, and I met with scores of young Hungarians there who were committed to building the structures and institutions necessary to ensure a strong democracy for the future. I have every confidence in them and in their commitment to strengthen the architecture of values that will safeguard future generations in this nation. The question for those of us gathered today is what we will do to strengthen the flood walls of tolerance, of pluralism, of decency, and civil society that protect our democracies from the dangers we have discussed this evening. That is the question I wish to leave with you. It is the challenge that each of us must ponder, and it is the cause that we must answer with our actions as we go forward in the months ahead. Thank you very much.
Tomicah, thank you very much for this for your speech with lots of very clear messages and also remembering your grandfather, your own history, and pointing to the future. And here we have Mr. Horvat János, and we promised him to have the first reaction.
You go ahead, and I will come back when you are finished.
Well, probably this is appropriate you stay here.
I will come back.
Yes.
I'm just at the beginning of a line of a queue of activities. So really my intention is not to enhance further on your very interesting, very valuable message, but rather to whet the appetite of this distinguished audience that I'm one of those who will be followed by others. Yes, I thank you for the opportunity to comment on your thoughts here, recalling several other earlier conversations of ours here and there, including in the company of Tom Lantos, with whom I had myself several things to share. The region we went to school in Budapest, and then being economists both, being persecuted by the Nazis, and having lived through Tom Lantos and János Horvat. But at this moment here, may I underscore, comment on one or two thoughts, how useful it is when the Tom Lantos Institute launches a program that those thoughts you shared with us are the initiators. The symbol to paralleling flood and hatred, thought-provoking and message at the same time. And it will be so rewarding to elaborate on it. If I were a poet, I certainly would do that, or sing of it. But I think many of us will go with it further. Another thought of yours is the confidence. The way I interpret it is telling the Hungarians that yes, we have the wherewithal to be confident, and it is to be self-confidence as well as interactive, if there is such a thing. I coined the term, an interactive confidence, when we know how to be with others. Not to over emphasize virtues and values, but to jive, to bring together with others. Hungarians, and I would like to see that Tom Lantos Institute programs will be an instrument to it, that Hungarians can be instruments of synergistic interactions. This confidence, self-confidence, that yes, the United States and Hungary, these two countries, when they interact, as we do so many ways, it's really more than 1 + 1. Synergy. The same with our neighboring countries. Bit modestly, or it doesn't sound very modest, I still say it, nowadays, recent years, even months, Hungarian communities more and more express the feeling that yes, we are worthy of something, and when we are misunderstood at home or by the world, we do not show our harm and emphasize on it, but patiently and in trust in ourselves and in trust in the goodwill of others, we face the reality. The Tom Lantos Institute and yourself, Tomicah, and I almost said spokesman, but you are much more than that, is an excellent beginning. One more thought, if I may share, that you were mentioning Hungary 1946 and 1956. Ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished speaker, not by accident, mentioned 1946. If there were anybody, as sometimes in the Hungarian society, still there are people who do not know the great significance of 1946. When this country, after all the turmoils, began to build a democracy and advanced significantly, overcoming hyperinflations and many, many other things. There were political tug of war, yet Hungary would have become one of the prosperous countries of Europe, if not for a foreign military intervention, which was opposed our ally, our friend, the United States of America. So what you have opened here is a broad field of thoughts, and yes, we are going to continue with that. And I know I have to speak for myself, but I'm not mistaken if I know that many others in this audience and throughout will make use of those thoughts, and they will be seed well planted into ground which is fertile for the thoughts you are bringing to us and the Lantos Institute is bringing to Hungary. I stop here because I'm very curious what I'm going to hear from others.
Thank you very much. And from now on, we're going to have a session with questions, please. Yes, the gentleman there, please.
My name is Peter Molnar, and I am speaking here as a Hungarian citizen and as an organizer of 1 Million for Hungarian Press Freedom and another group which is called The Constitution is Not a Toy. And thank you for your very nice speech. It was really clear and including messages between the lines, if I can add that. And I have two questions. One is that these are sort of specific questions. One is related to building safeguards against concentration of power. The other is related to racism. Building safeguards against concentration of power starts with ensuring press freedom and freedom of speech, of which Hungary has a wonderfully rich tradition. And unfortunately, now in Hungary we have a media council that supervises the whole media market, and the members of this council were picked by only one party. So I would like to ask your comments about whether, in your view, it can be reconciled with the need to decentralize power, and also maybe how in the United States or in other democracies you think such an institution would be reviewed by the courts. And the other question is that currently in Hungary, unfortunately, Roma children, also other poor people's children, but mostly Roma Hungarian children are really in great danger in the sense that segregation of them in schools will be sort of constitutionalized in a way as one of the amendments of the Basic Law provides, opens the door for the concept that sort of catching up classes in a very Hippocratic way that would sort of frame segregation as if it would help Roma children to catch up. So this would sort of make constitutional segregation. And this is a most shameful racist thing to do. We organized the demonstration, and on the flyer we used a picture from the American South when separate but equal was the rule, and the picture on the flyer showed how a black person was drinking from a tap which had the sign colored, and there was next to it the white sign. So I realize the situation. In a way, we all know what we are talking about. But I still wanted to raise this question because it is so shameful that every person, every patriot, everyone should be active against it. And I just wanted to ask your comments about it, understanding the situation, understanding the rules of diplomacy, and understanding everything. But sometimes the truth must be told. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for those interesting and important questions. First, on the Media Council, we have concerns about the Media Council. We have articulated those concerns and will continue to articulate those concerns. We've been quite forthright with our partners in the Hungarian government about our fears that the structure could be misutilized. Second, on the other issue, these are very, very challenging topics, and as you know, there has been an effort on the part of many successive Hungarian governments to make progress in terms of integration of the Roma population. Unfortunately, we have not, I don't think any of us would say that the results to date are satisfactory, and so there's a critical need to take another look at what has been done with an eye toward ensuring that the measures that are adopted are in keeping with internationally recognized best practices and hopefully geared toward providing that very vibrant section of Hungarian society with the opportunity to realize its full potential and have equal access to all the other rights and opportunities that Hungarians enjoy.
Thank you very much. Next question.
Thank you. My name is Katina Ercsei. I sit on the board of the Tom Lantos Institute, and I'm very happy to be here. Following up on Peter's questions, I remember when Phil on the board, one of the best friends of Tom, said that whenever we think about how we could build up the Institute to be a valuable, meaningful human rights watchdog or institution, we always have to say and think about what would Tom say? What would Tom Lantos say in a situation like this? And as you elaborated, and as we know, Hungary is in a major mess, both in the constitutional issues, media, judiciary, concentration of the education sector, and so on and so on. What do you think the priorities should be? What would you say? What would Tom say, you think? What will be the first issues that we should deal with? Because rebuilding civil society is a long-term process. Starting to make society simply not tolerate racism and hatred is also a long process. But there are some very specific issues that we could do as Hungarians to sort of build back some of the foundation stones of democracy and those embankments that you mentioned. Where would you start?
I think that's a very interesting question. I think certainly my grandfather recognized, based on his own life experience, that democracy is a road traveled and not a destination. And this is a process in every nation, the United States included, that takes generations. We are never going to perfect democracy. It is continually a work in progress. So I think he would start with the realism that accompanies that realization. Beyond that, I think he would be optimistic, I hope, that Hungarians will be able to come together across the divides that too often limit progress. And ironically, I think the flood has provided an exceptional example of this. And we've seen Hungarians, regardless of their background, regardless of their political affiliation, recognize that they're all in this together. And the flood is going to either wash out a village or it's not going to wash out a village. And it depends on everyone working in cooperation to address that challenge. And so I think, frankly, overcoming the polarization in Hungarian society might be his first priority. He grew up in a Hungary that was defined by the struggle between fascists on one side and communists on the other. And both of these ideologies repeatedly proved themselves willing to slaughter citizens without cause if it would advance their goals. We are all very fortunate that we don't live in that reality anymore. And given that we don't live in that reality anymore, there should be greater opportunity for us to work together and for Hungarians to work together within the society. So my expectation is that if he were here, his first priority would be to get Hungarians talking with each other, to get Hungarians working together, and to get Hungarians to recognize that at the end of the day, while this may be the bouquet upon God's cap, it's a small country, and it is going to prosper or fail on the basis of collective efforts, and so we need that collective effort.
I'm Sándor Kerekes. I was raised here in Budapest, but I dwell in Canada nowadays. You came to a very strange time here. We all understand that the society of democracy is based on a consensus where everybody agrees, at least in as much as to retain social interaction. Society would not work any other way. And what makes this time of your arrival or your presence here so strange is the fact that, at least in my perception, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, there is a section of society which seems to overthrow this consensus, repudiate it. This consensus does not seem to work anymore. There are two questions to be on Hungarian and to be precise. What is to be done by those who still would like to participate in the consensus and retain it? And are we supposed to accept this overthrow in the name of consensus and pretend that we accept the repudiation of the consensus in the name of consensus when we know it hurts us? What is to be done?
This is a very complicated question, and I'm not sure that I followed you completely, but I think I understand part of what you're getting at. Look, we say, again, Hungary, fortunately, is not at all in this category, but in other parts of the world, we often face situations where individuals seek to harness democracy in order to end democracy. That is a very troubling phenomenon, and we are outspoken whenever we encounter it, that you need to ensure that you can't utilize the tools of democratic action in order to close off avenues for democratic action. So I think that may be part of what you were getting at. Beyond that, I think it's critical to recognize that there does need to be a certain foundational level of agreement on core principles within any nation. And to the extent that agreement is absent, it's time to have a national conversation about what can be done to regain it. Maybe that is part of the solution that you were going for as well.
Hi, I'm Stephen Geiger, the founder of the Mensch Foundation. Tomicah, I kindly remember your grandfather. I met him several times in California as well as in Hungary, in 2007 as well. You were not there at the time, but he was at the hotel with your grandmother, and we had a conversation. In 2005, in California, our foundation awarded your grandfather as a mensch. Mensch being a very, very good human being. In the Yiddish terminology, in German, it just means a human being. It's very important that his legacy be carried out. You mentioned the young lady, Phil Friedman, who I knew very well as well. And this idea is a process. It's not there's no gold bullet. We cannot just wish the problems to go away. We have to work on it. And Anna Maria and I have spoken several times. You have a good director right now. And the Mensch Foundation will be your partner in whatever efforts that you do. And hopefully we can make some of the things that you alluded to in your very intelligent diplomatic speech will come true with a lot of work from all people in all parts of society, including Mr. Horvat's political membership as well.
Well, this
Thank
is
you.
a world that needs more mensches, and so I'm glad to hear that and
Don't mention
encouraged.
it.
Hello, I'm Anna Nemeth. I'm a student here. Dr. Tillemann, thank you so much for your lecture. I actually wanted to ask you to reflect on something that I read not so long ago. I think Google's Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen, who has been your colleague with Hillary Clinton, wrote a new book called The New Digital Age, which puts forward the idea that democratic transition is held by technology and technology that comes from the US. And I was wondering if you could say a few words about how this can translate in Hungary.
Well, that's a great question, and I will go home and email Jared, who's a good friend, and let him know that I was asked about his book in Budapest. He will be very happy about that. We, I think, see a number of different things happening in the world right now. The first is that as a result of advances in technology, it has never been easier or cheaper in human history to bring people together around common ideas and unite them in civil society. That is an important development that is having huge ramifications on the world that we live in. And we see it in terms of the domestic political dynamics in our countries. We also see it globally, and it's remaking the landscape of diplomacy on which we operate. The other reality which we have to confront simultaneously, though, is that on their own, technologies are neutral. And just like steel can be used to either build hospitals or make machetes, and just like nuclear power can be used to either light a city or destroy it, these technologies don't take sides. They will serve the purpose that we put them toward. And so while these technologies don't take sides in the struggle between right and wrong, we do. And it's up to us to say, we are going to use these tools on behalf of democracy. We are going to use these tools on behalf of accountability. We are going to use these tools to build societies in which individuals will be free to realize their potential. To the extent we make that choice, you can see extraordinary things happen. In the United States, the election of Barack Obama is perhaps the most vivid realization we have seen to date of how technology can be utilized to remake the political landscape. But we are witnessing this phenomena from Tunisia to Cairo to Burma to countries around the world. And I think we're only just beginning to see its potential. It's a great question.
I'm Ferenc Orosz, executive of the Wallenberg Association. I know that how important was Raoul Wallenberg for your grandfather. Thank you very much, Peter, that you raised the issue of the Roma segregation. I like, because it is a very important issue, I like to add one comment. Last week something important happened because anti-segregation roundtable was initiated by the minister responsible for it, and human rights activists as Erzsébet Mohácsi and experts on Roma education as Judith Berke and others participated in it. Hopefully it will be able to make suggestions for the government will be accepted. but something already happened, that the minister proclaimed that he withdraws the most debated sentences from the bill, which I think is because the many protests of this. It's still not happened because this bill was not accepted yet in the parliament, but in the near future, hopefully, it will happen.
Well, I think, again, I'm not sure if I caught all of it, but I think the essence of your question is what can we do to address Holocaust remembrance issues?
No, I will comment it.
Okay.
No questions.
Okay, very good. Well, I think we have time for one more then, if I'm not mistaken.
David Sestai, alumni of this institution, which I'm really proud of. If I may take the liberty to turn the title of your speech around, from the street to the courtroom, one of our very good skit now to fight genocide and mass murder are the courts, international courts. Do you see the American Congress ratifying soon, anytime soon, the accession of the US to the International Criminal Court?
It's a good question. I learned after 4 years of working in the Congress on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that it is a very dangerous thing to predict what the Congress is going to do. And so I don't know that I want to venture into that space now. What I will say is that we've seen some very encouraging developments in terms of the utilization of the court to combat genocide, as you indicate. And I think there has been, in recent years, a greater willingness on the part of the United States to support many of the efforts associated with that work. I think it's likely that that will continue. So regardless of how our Congress chooses to proceed on this, I think it is very likely that the tools that you reference will play a much greater role going forward in holding individuals accountable when there are dramatic deviations from the principles of human rights and when we witness acts of war crimes and atrocities such as you describe. And I think that's something, again, speaking at a personal level, that my grandfather would be very gratified to see going forward. And thank you for the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tomicah. Oh yeah, I need the microphone. Thank you very much for everyone and for the questions and for the responses. And after this we are going to have a small reception to which everyone is invited. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Tomicah.
You can find this in the coin. You can find the logo of the university, symbolizing